You wake up, check your phone, and see the same forecast as yesterday. Rain. All day, again. You sigh, grab a blanket, and settle in for another lazy afternoon indoors. It's mildly annoying, maybe a little cozy even. You'll survive it easily, and honestly, you might binge a show and forget it ever happened. Now strip away the roof, the electricity, and the grocery store down the street. Push yourself back tens of thousands of years into a body that hasn't eaten properly in days, crouched at the edge of a cave, while the sky refuses to clear. For your ancestors, a week of nonstop rain wasn't a mood. It was a full-blown emergency, one that could kill you in more than one way before it ever let up. Let's start with the most obvious danger: your own body losing heat. A wet body cools down far faster than a dry one, and without tight clothing or a truly sealed shelter, your core temperature can drop into dangerous territory in a matter of hours. That's true even in places that feel warm during the day. Once night falls, especially at higher elevations across ancient Africa, the temperature can crash, and a body already soaked from hours of rain has almost no buffer left. Cold alone was enough to end a life quietly, without any drama at all. Then there's the water itself. Most ancient shelters, caves, and rock overhangs were built near a reliable water source for good reason, but that same convenient location becomes a liability the moment a storm refuses to stop. Archaeologists have pulled up layers of flood sediment sealed directly into cave floors that were clearly lived in right up until the water arrived. In a disturbing number of those sites, the record of human occupation simply ends after that sediment layer. Nobody came back. Whatever happened during that flood was bad enough to make an entire group abandon a place they had called home. And then, almost as if the weather wasn't punishing enough on its own, there's the third threat: company you never invited. Heavy, sustained rain pushes every animal in the area toward the nearest dry space, and sometimes that dry space is the same cave your family is huddled inside. At several sites across southern Africa, researchers have found human remains and large cat remains mixed together in the exact same layer of earth. Some of those human skulls carry puncture marks that match, almost perfectly, the size and spacing of a big cat's teeth. The rain didn't just make everyone miserable. It crowded predator, prey, and person into the same small, dry corner and waited to see what happened. None of these three dangers stayed in their own lane, either. A body losing heat reacts more slowly to a predator creeping closer. A flooded entrance seals off the one dry escape route a family had. Every extra hour of rain didn't just repeat the danger, it stacked it. That compounding effect is exactly what separated a week-long storm from an ordinary bad afternoon. And it's why one single task mattered more than anything else once the rain began: keep the fire alive. Here's the part most people never think about. Knowing how to tend a flame and knowing how to create one from nothing are two completely different skills. And for most of human history, plenty of people almost certainly couldn't do the second one on demand. There's solid evidence of controlled fire use going back roughly 400,000 years at Kasem Cave in modern-day Israel, and some researchers push the timeline even further, arguing for fire use nearly 1,000,000 years ago at Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa. Controlling fire, though, isn't the same thing as reliably striking a new one, so if the flame died mid-storm, that could be it. No fire, no warmth, no cooked food, until the sky finally cleared enough to try again with damp materials and worse odds. That's why carrying an ember became the real insurance policy. Groups wrapped a glowing coal in green leaves, or packed it into a dense fungus that grows on tree trunks and can smolder quietly for hours, functioning almost like a portable pilot light. And this wasn't guesswork. When researchers examined the naturally preserved body of a traveler who died in the Alps roughly 5,300 years ago, they found a complete fire-starting kit tucked into his belongings. Fungus for tinder, flint, a lump of iron pyrite for striking sparks, and backup plant material. Thousands of years after the last ice age, losing your fire was still serious enough that people carried dedicated tools purely to prevent it. Similar kits, in slightly different forms, keep showing up across wildly different regions and time periods, which tells you this wasn't one person's clever trick. It was inherited knowledge passed down deliberately because forgetting it could cost your life. So the moment rain started falling, Protecting that flame outranked everything. Move it deeper into the shelter. Shield it with hide or brush. Feed it carefully, never too much, never too little. People learned to search under thick tree canopies for dead branches that stayed dry even in a downpour, and to split open soaked logs to reach the dry wood hiding at the core. Birch bark became especially prized because it holds a natural oil that keeps it burning even when the outside is damp. During a long storm, one person might spend hours simply sitting beside the flame, guarding it, because that fire wasn't just heat. It was light, safety, cooked food, and the one place the entire group would gather. There's a quieter skill in this story, too, one that rarely gets mentioned. Some hunter-gatherer groups documented in more recent history became remarkably good at predicting a multi-day storm before a single drop fell. Watching how certain ants sealed off their mounds, noticing birds flying unusually low, or picking up on a shift in humidity against the skin. Reading those signs early meant a group could stockpile dry firewood, food, and tinder in advance, turning a potential disaster into something closer to a planned inconvenience. That kind of environmental reading skill barely shows up in the archaeological record, but it may have been one of the single most valuable survival skills a person could have. With the fire holding and the group relatively dry, a new question takes over. What do you actually do with days of enforced stillness? You build things. Cave floors are packed with evidence of manufacturing, stone tools at every stage of completion, and dense clusters of tiny flaking debris exactly where someone would have sat near the fire for hours, chipping away. But it goes far beyond stone. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists uncovered what amounts to a pigment workshop roughly 100,000 years old, complete with abalone shells used as mixing bowls, ground ochre, and bone tools for stirring and applying it. That's not the behavior of someone in survival panic. That's organized, deliberate production, likely carried out while rain pounded down outside. Bone needles start appearing in the record around 61,000 years ago in southern Africa, later spreading across Europe and Asia, delicate tools with tiny drilled eyes that nobody makes while running from danger. You only make something that fine when you've got hours of uninterrupted time, which a week-long storm handed people over and over. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. At a Neanderthal site called Abri du Maras in France, archaeologists found a tiny fragment of twisted plant fiber cord dating back roughly 52,000 years, among the oldest confirmed pieces of string ever discovered. At Hohlefels in Germany, researchers uncovered a 35,000-year-old tool carved from mammoth ivory, drilled with holes and cut with spiral grooves, built specifically for twisting plant fibers into rope. Someone sat down and engineered a dedicated cord-making device. Twisting fiber into rope by hand is slow and repetitive, close to the perfect bad weather task, and rope quietly changed everything that came after it. Shelters lashed together, snares and traps, tools bound to handles. A huge share of human technology depends on string somewhere in its history, and it may have been invented by someone with nothing to do but wait out the rain. Shelters got upgraded too. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something unexpected from around 77,000 years ago. Real bedding, layers of sedges, reeds and grasses arranged deliberately, topped with leaves from a plant that naturally repels insects. That's not just surviving in a cave, that's turning a cave into a home. Even better, those bedding layers were periodically burned off and rebuilt, meaning people were running a working pest control routine tens of thousands of years before anyone had a word for it. All this comfort likely came at a cost, though. Researchers studying ancient teeth and bones have found something called growth arrest lines. Faint bands that form whenever a developing body goes through serious nutritional stress and later recovers. In regions with long, unpredictable rainy seasons, these lines often cluster in patterns that match the expected wet stretches. Even with fire, tools, and shelter figured out, extended rain still quietly drained calories that weren't always easy to replace. Then there's the part that goes beyond survival entirely. Deep inside Chauvet Cave in southern France sit paintings roughly 36,000 years old. Lions, horses, rhinos, and bears rendered with a level of motion and anatomical precision that still stuns the researchers who study them. Some animals look mid-stride, muscles tensed, heads turned as though reacting to something just out of frame. This is the work of people who had spent countless hours watching these animals and then recreated them from memory, far underground, by the light of a small burning lamp. Chauvet isn't alone either. Lascaux and Altamira show similar mastery, and cave art discovered in Sulawesi, Indonesia, has been dated to at least 45,000 years old, making it among the oldest confirmed figurative art on the planet. What makes it stranger is where these paintings sit, almost never near the entrance, where you'd naturally shelter. Deep inside, sometimes hundreds of yards through tight crawling passages in chambers someone had to fight to reach. Somebody carried a small oil lamp into total darkness and painted there on purpose. You don't do that on a clear afternoon with good hunting outside. You do that after the rain has been falling for days, every tool already finished and sharpened, and there's genuinely nothing left to do but go further into the dark and make something. Nobody can prove outright that cave art began as a rainy season activity, but the pattern lines up too cleanly to brush off. Some of prehistory's greatest creative achievements show up exactly where people were most likely trapped indoors. And rain may not have only produced art. It may have helped produce culture itself. Picture 15 to 30 people crammed into the same dry space for days, with nothing left to do but talk. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner compared daytime conversations to nighttime fireside conversations among the Jew/Huansi people of the Kalahari Desert. Daytime talk stayed practical: land, resources, complaints. Nighttime talk around the fire shifted almost entirely towards stories, songs, and shared ceremony. Firelight itself seemed to soften the mood and loosen people's guard. A campfire wasn't just heat, it was the original social network, and what got shared there was rarely small talk. It was survival knowledge, where water still ran in a dry stretch, which stone made the best tools, how to track a specific animal, plus something less practical but just as important: myths explaining where the rain came from and why. Nearly every ancient culture has its own rain mythology, and someone had to invent each one, almost certainly while sitting through the exact storm the story was trying to explain. Packing that many people into one space for days also created friction, and cultures developed real customs to manage it. Several groups studied by anthropologists maintain what researchers call joking relationships. Certain pairs, often in-laws or people close in age, who are expected to tease each other freely, alongside avoidance relationships, where other people are expected to keep a respectful distance and limit conversation almost entirely. Both customs sound strange on the surface, but they worked as pressure valves, giving a crowded, storm-bound group built-in ways to diffuse tension before it turned into something dangerous. And some of these stories lasted an extraordinarily long time. Among the oldest verified oral traditions on record are Australian Aboriginal stories describing sea level changes from roughly 7,000 years ago, later confirmed independently by modern geological surveys. Those stories survived purely by being told generation after generation, with no writing at all. That kind of memory doesn't form by accident. It requires a group spending enormous stretches of time doing exactly one thing: sitting together and repeating a story until it becomes permanent. Those long, wet weeks weren't dead time. They were transmission time, when knowledge moved from old to young, hands-on, story by story. Here's the twist most people miss completely. Extended rain wasn't purely bad news. Sometimes it was the best thing that could happen. Once the rain finally lets up, the ground turns into perfect tracking conditions: soft, clear, and easy to read. Rain also meant water security. And natural rock basins near almost every known prehistoric campsite show clear signs of being deliberately deepened to hold more of it. Food didn't disappear either. It changed. Certain mushrooms and edible plants surge after heavy rain. Tubers pull free from softened soil far more easily. And insects appear in enormous numbers, with termites offering an incredibly protein-rich meal that requires no tools or weapons at all, just patience. Modern chimpanzees still gorge themselves during these swarms, and there's every reason to think early humans did exactly the same, probably on a much larger scale. So, what did people actually do through a week of relentless rain? Everything that mattered. They protected the one fire keeping them alive. They shaped the tools they'd need for the next hunt. They stitched clothing to carry them through the next cold stretch. They twisted the cord that held their shelters and traps together. They ground the pigment that ended up on a cave wall far underground. They told the stories that carried survival knowledge safely into the next generation. And when the storm finally broke, they stepped outside onto soft ground covered in fresh tracks and got straight back to work. That week of rain never actually slowed them down. It bought them the time to prepare for everything waiting on the other side of it. The tool, the stitch, the story, the painted animal on a cave wall. So the next time a rained-in afternoon stretches out and feels unbearably slow, remember what that same stretch of forced stillness once produced. Not boredom, resourcefulness. And that instinct, the one that refuses to just sit and wait, might be one of the biggest reasons any of us are here to complain about the weather at all.